Hi, friends. This is Emily, the owner and founder of Friendly City Books. And today I'm really excited to be joined by a friend and fellow alum of my high school here in Columbus. And that is author, photographer, and filmmaker Kate Medley. Hi, Kate.
Hi, how's it going,
Hi,
Emily?
I'm good. How are you?
I was gonna say go Waves, but that
Yeah,
doesn't, I don't know if that quite has the ring that we're going for.
I mean, we're not really a sports school. Although I can say, so Kate and I attended at different times the Mississippi School for Math and Science, and they do have a pretty mean esports team.
Well, and I was gonna say a lot of folks would say that it's not really an art school, but look at us liberal arts majors.
Yes. Well, Chuck Yarbrough, who taught history to me and
The
is still
best.
teaching history there. Yes. He
God love
always
them.
says, yeah, he always says something like 50% of math and science, MSMS graduates go on to do something besides math and science. So
Thank
here's
God.
here's a sample size of two.
Love it.
Well, let me read Kate's bio to y'all so that those of you who don't know her as well as I do will know a little bit about her. Kate is a Durham, North Carolina based visual journalist and filmmaker documenting the American South. Her work focuses on storytelling and environmental portraiture and often explores issues of social justice and the shifting politics of the region. As a kid growing up in Jackson, Mississippi, her first job was making snowballs at a gas station. And
Hey.
and this is her first book, and it's called Thank You, Please Come Again: How Gas Stations Feed and Fuel the American South. It's beautiful. And it's a
Thanks, Emily.
this is a coffee table book. In case I'm holding it up for those who are watching the video, but if you're not watching this, just know that this is a very large, full color, photography coffee table book. I have to say before I get into my questions, I love that you mentioned making snowballs at a gas station because I too, as probably a 12, 13-year old in small town Mississippi, had a summer job making snowballs at a snowball
Good
stand.
for
And
you. Love that.
and we call them snowballs. They are not snow cones. This is very
Exactly.
important.
I had a friend from another region read that line in my bio and be like, I'm not equipped with the cultural context to understand what this sentence means at all. But you are.
Yes, no, if you know, you know.
You
And
know.
speaking of people who would know, I also have to mention that Kate's book has a foreword by the one and only Kiesa Layman.
God
Um,
bless that man. He's the
yes,
best.
I mean, one of the greatest Mississippi writers living and working today, and also just so generous.
Oh, God. I mean, solely in the fact that when approached by me, a first time author he'd never heard of, to write the foreword to this book, he did not hesitate. He said yes. And he wrote the hell out of that forward. Oh my God. Forever indebted to that kind hearted man.
Yeah, no,
He's
he is
amazing.
awesome. I mean, he is such a champion for new writers. And of course, I'm sure it doesn't hurt that you both are from Jackson originally. In fact,
Yeah.
I wasn't going to say this on the podcast, but I'll go ahead and say it. I met a friend of your mom's recently
Oh, who's
because
that?
we had a book event the other day with Jerry Wilson.
For Jerry Wilson,
And
another
she said,
amazing Mississippi author.
yeah. And we did a podcast with her. And she said that she's in your mom's book club, I think.
Yeah, I think they've had that book club going for like 40 years, maybe
Yeah.
longer. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
That's what she
I
said.
can't wait to read her new book. I'm so glad that you had her there.
Oh, yeah. It's excellent. So Jerry's is a great one to read. Kate is a great one to look through. Um, and I mean, so let's talk about like how this happened. It's described as a photographic road trip in which you discover gas station restaurants in the South. How did this
Yeah,
come to you?
exactly. So grew up in Jackson, traveling around Mississippi, around the South, as you did, I'm sure, as many of your viewers did. And we weren't a family that would like gather all five of us on a Tuesday night and like go eat dinner at the gas station. it wasn't like we weren't that committed. It was just like, we were on our way to Tuscaloosa. And so passing through Meridian, we would stop at a gas station and get a sausage biscuit or whatever. It was much more run of the mill, casual, very utilitarian in the way that I imagine all Southerners can relate to. Um, and so in my work, both as a photojournalist and in studying the South, I have a master's in Southern Studies, and studying specifically the foodways of the South. Increasingly, as I stopped at these places, I found it to be a real sort of gap in the scholarship of the foodways of the South, that we have these cooks, these workers, these cultural spaces that are vital to many communities around the South, that haven't been studied, that haven't been explored, that haven't been celebrated in the way that I think that they should be. So that's really the genesis of the book. I mean, in a nuts and bolts way, it's just me driving around the South working as a photojournalist and looking for lunch or dinner or a snack. And most often, I mean, like if I have a choice between the local Burger King or the local Exxon, I mean, I'm headed through the doors of that Exxon. So
Yeah.
that's kind of, yeah, that's how it started.
And so how long was this book in the making? Like, what's the time period of the photographs that are included?
Yeah. So I in 2012 did an article for, I live in North Carolina. I joined forces with my friend Emily Wallace, and we did an article for the local alt weekly paper about the best gas station food in the Triangle. And it ran on the cover and got a lot of feedback, like the good, the bad, the ugly. People had opinions about it. They thought that we hit the nail on the head. They thought that we were wrong. They thought we were blasphemous. They thought we needed to get in their car and go on taqueria tour or Pigfoot tour or whatever. Um, but the bottom line was people were engaged. People were into it. People wanted to talk about it. So that happened in 2012. I took some time off work later that year and went to the Mississippi Delta because I really felt, having grown up in Mississippi, that um, while it's fun, while North Carolina has a robust gas station culture, um, I mean, in my heart of hearts, the core, the root of gas station food and culture is the deep, deep South, is Mississippi, is rural Louisiana, is the Florida Panhandle. Um, so I took some time off and went exploring around the Mississippi Delta. Uh, the tourism, I think it's called Visit Mississippi. They gave me a small grant to, if memory serves, ex- explore anything in Mississippi that doesn't make us look bad. Um, and so I used that time and that grant to study gas station food in the Delta. And this very little known outlet at the time, the Bitter Southerner, they had just launched, and they agreed to run it as a feature. Um, and so yeah, that's really, those two articles were the start of the journey. Um, a lot of things transpired in the 10 years since until it became a book. But I'd sort of dabble in it here and there and make stops along the way. And then I spent a lot of time in 2023 wrapping it up to get it into book form.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Bitter Southerner. We'd have to give them a shout out because um, the Bitter Southerner is a huge part of my own kind of origin story with launching Friendly City Books and moving back to Mississippi. I was a big fan of theirs, basically from the start. And I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time. And I went from thinking I would never move back home to maybe I will, to actually doing it. And the Bitter Souther made me feel like I wouldn't be alone if I did that. That there were more people who were like me in the South who wanted to really build a strong community together. And so the fact that the Bitter Souther published your book, I just think is so fantastic. I just love them very much.
I love to hear that. I mean, they have really, so Kyle Jones and Dave Whitling, they started this, I think officially in 2013. And they have done this incredible thing of cultivating a community of forward thinking people like yourself around the South who have committed their lives and livelihoods to making this region a better, more equitable place. And they do that by way of complicated storytelling.
Yeah.
So I just, yes, to give them a shout out is to put it lightly. They brought it all to this project, and I'm very grateful.
Yeah. And, I also think there was this golden age of Twitter kind of around this same time period. And a lot of Mississippi expats and people who were still living in Mississippi found each other. And we had this like Mississippi Twitter thing that was going on. And I don't know if you
God,
also,
Emily, I didn't even know.
oh, yeah. And I
I
feel like
missed it.
the queen of Mississippi Twitter was Alex McDaniel. And she had this like thing about gas station food. And I remember this was another thing that kind of like raised it in my consciousness as a Southern phenomenon. And I looked back on it thinking, yeah, when I was a kid, every year when we would do our local Mardi Gras parade, there was always a fight in the family about who got to go to the Chevron gas station and get the fried chicken because everybody wanted to be, because it was the easiest job, but it was also the best,
Was this in
So
Ocean Springs?
this is in Bay St. Louis. So
Bay
yeah,
St. Louis, that's what it
yeah,
is.
on
Yeah.
the other side. But yeah, so like that was the thing, like fried chicken from the Chevron for Mardi Gras. And now that I live in Columbus, there is a gas station restaurant that is beloved here called United Deli that I've been telling you about, run
I
by
can't wait to
immigrants.
go.
It's so great. I mean, like I always get a gyro when I go there. So and they have seating inside, which I wasn't as familiar with. Like maybe more gas stations do have that, but to me that was like kind of unique for United Deli. But anyway, this is a long way of saying I am curious. Do you think gas station cuisine is a distinctly Southern thing?
This is a good question. um, so I'm of course on the heels of making this book about gas station food in the South, and I'm going to go out on a lark here, and I think the answer to your question is no. It's not a distinctly Southern thing. I think that it can often be a distinctively rural thing. That said, some of the greatest, most diverse, most interesting, most pushing the envelope food that you will find in gas stations happens in urban areas. But there's this commonality amongst in rural areas where often the gas station is the only business for miles, and so it has to function, not only as a place to fuel up, but also as a grocery store, sometimes as a post office, almost certainly as a restaurant. So I mean, I lived for some time in Montana, and you definitely saw this sort of ingenuity happening in the backs of gas stations out there as well. My husband keeps suggesting that I make gas station food part two, which goes international, but we're not quite there yet.
Yeah. Well, one thing that came to mind for me, especially as you talked about urban gas stations, is, in Japan, 7-Eleven, like it is the open secret that the best food is, like you get these little triangular shaped rice balls. And they're like $2 or like the equivalent. But when I was thinking about this before I asked you this question, I kind of was turning this over my head and realized, well, even though the 7-Eleven has this like beloved food in Japan, it's still mass produced, it's still commercialized. And maybe that's the difference.
That is a difference for sure. For the purposes of this book and this journey, I was particularly interested in stopping at businesses that, whether or not they were locally owned was less important. Locally, that they were making decisions locally was important to me, because what I really wanted to capture and celebrate was businesses that are catering to their community, that are reflecting their community, that are listening to their community, and then delivering on those needs. Um, so I joked that if any of these places had a marketing department, it had to be the person behind the cash register, or otherwise I was out.
Yeah.
If the decisions were being made in Houston about what was happening in Florida, that was less intriguing to me. I wanted to I wanted these spaces to show me the people, not just the people who were working there, but I wanted to see these people in the signage out on the side of the road, whether that was like hand painted or um, just sort of locally conjured. I wanted to see that community reflected in the menu. If there's a big Indian population, maybe there's samosas on the menu, or I wanted these spaces to tell me about who lives there and what they value. So for
Yeah,
that reason, I didn't draw a hard line, but I found myself gravitating to places that were more independently run.
I was thinking about the menu as you were answering that question because y- you found a lot of unique ethnic food that I think people wouldn't necessarily associate with the gas station. Like, even though, like, I raised the example of gas station fried chicken, like, that is not a monolith. Like, that doesn't represent all of them. I remember, there's like banh mi in here. I mean, what's some of your favorites that you discovered?
Girl, there is so much gas station chicken. So you're not wrong. But I did want to push beyond that. I wanted to explore that, but also push beyond that. Yeah, when I first got started, again back to like 2012, I was headed to the Mississippi Delta, and I put out this query on social media, and it was just like flooded with responses. And it was not just like go to Greenwood, they have great gas station food. It was like go to the Double Quick on Churton Street in Greenwood, but you got to get there before 10 a.m. because that's when Miss Debbie's cooking and she's the best. And then someone else would be like, not Churton Street. You got to go to the Double Quick on Main Street when Deborah's cooking. So you can go deep just on fried chicken alone. That said, I went into some of this with a theory that perhaps one could chart the emerging immigrant foodways of the South by way of what's happening in the backs of these gas stations. These are spaces that are low barrier to entry, low startup cost. Maybe the the next wave of like best chefs of the South are getting their start in the backs of these gas stations. And I wasn't entirely wrong about that. When you are traveling around the Mississippi Delta, for instance, these are spaces that can't afford to take a chance on serving a banh mi or serving a gyro. Like they got to be serving a burger, chicken tenders, potato logs, because they have to service every single person that comes through there, and they have to serve food that is universally liked, that is universally affordable, that is hot, that is quick, that is portable. Um, but then as I explored more urban areas, New Orleans, Nashville, Raleigh, um, assuredly Atlanta, they are serving a very different population, um, and they are themselves a very different population. And so in those cities, I found a lot more global foodways, diverse menus. Maybe they were serving chicken tenders, but that was like 5% of their menu, and the rest was Senegalese food. And I did find that a lot. That if they were serving a global menu, they were also serving a hamburger, because again, they have to be everything to everybody. Um, so yeah, I tried to get kind of a balance of both. But I was particularly interested in the immigrant foodways that were happening in these spaces.
Okay, so you've used the term foodways, and I'm going to put you on the spot. Would you define that for someone who may not be familiar with the term?
Oh, sure. So I've never been asked that, but I mean, foodways is just sort of um, the culture of food, I would say, in the most short term. Um, you and I have talked about the Southern Foodways Alliance, which is based at the University of Mississippi in Oxford, a nonprofit organization that's been very influential to my thinking and my career. Um, and that organization sets out to document and celebrate the changing foodways of the South. So we're not talking about like a staid view, looking back on the foodways of the South. We're looking forward to see, in the context in the context of the past, what's happening in the present, and what might we expect from the future, and how can we document that and celebrate that. And so, this book is very much inspired by the work that Southern Foodways does and continues to do.
Yeah, they do amazing work. We are huge fans of theirs, and have met a lot of amazing people through the Southern Foodways Alliance. And I just also love how the idea of having the Southern Foodways and the study of it demonstrates that the South is very diverse within this region. It's so easy for outsiders looking in to assume that the South, and especially Mississippi, is a monolith. And because I grew up on the coast, I have that, and if you're Mississippian, you would get this. I mean, we really do feel like there are Mississippis within Mississippi and these very, very different regions of the state. The coast where I grew up is very different from Columbus, where I live now, which is very different from where Kate grew up in Jackson. And then as Kate was describing her experience in the Delta, I mean, the Delta was another world to us. And a part of the state that I'm only really beginning to get a chance to spend more time in. So that's one thing that I just think is also really special about what this particular segment of scholarship does, is demonstrate these like microcultures within the South.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who grew up on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, do you identify? I know you identify as a Mississippian, but if we were erasing state lines and going sub-regional here, would you draw your region north of you or west of you?
Around New Orleans.
Yeah, right. I mean,
Because
the foodways of the coast, my dad's family's from the coast. And if I were drawing the foodways, if I were drawing the regional foodways of the South, I would draw that line, I-10 down to New Orleans and the Mississippi Gulf Coast. The foodways is a direct import export of that area, I would say. Would you agree?
Oh, totally. Because I grew up eating Cajun food. I was born in New Orleans. My parents were born in New Orleans. There was a lot of back and forth between New Orleans and Mississippi, actually because of hurricanes. Like my parents
Sure.
left New Orleans because of Hurricane Betsy and then got Camille in 1969, but ended up staying. But I grew up eating red beans and rice and gumbo and jambalaya and doing crawfish boils and all. So,
Man,
yeah.
you lucky dog.
But like there's this joke that the two biggest cities in Mississippi are Memphis and New Orleans, and you do see that in food and culture. Even though
I only take
Jackson,
slight offense.
I know. I'm sorry. Jackson's still our official capital, but
the city that tries.
Yeah. But, when I was a kid growing up on the coast, I actually didn't spend that much time in Jackson unless we were like going on a field trip. But now I have a lot more appreciation for it. And since we're talking about food, there are some really great new restaurants in Jackson.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like I've been to Elvy's, I've been to Polito. Even at the two museums in the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, Nick Wallace's lunch place.
He's amazing.
It's fantastic. And he has
a new book coming out.
Oh, we're going to have to get that.
Get him on your calendar.
Get him.
Yeah. He's a firecracker.
Yeah. And like, speaking of like, kind of like this new Southern cuisine, like one thing I remember having on the menu there is it was ramen, but made with like pork and greens, because pork is in a lot of Japanese ramen anyway, but he did the Southern spin on it. So anyway, I just thought you appreciate that.
Oh yeah, he's an all-star. Adore that man.
And speaking of Jackson, one thing Jackson's claim to fame in Mississippi is I think it's the only city in Mississippi with a Whole Foods. And you have a little experience with Whole Foods.
I had a little something to do with that store. That's true.
But I mean, you spent
no accident that it was right around the corner from where my parents used to live. I'm just kidding.
And across the street from Lemuria, the big iconic bookstore in Jackson. But I mean, you spent like 10 years like traveling on behalf of Whole Foods, talking to like farmers and ranchers and the producers.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. So let's see. This is a longer story than you want, but I studied journalism in undergrad in Montana, and then I moved back to the South by way of newspaper work, um, and decided to go back to grad school. Decided I was done with journalism forever. I hated it. Had to get out of it. So I went to grad school and started a master's in Southern Studies. And on the second day of class, Hurricane Katrina blew through. And, I sort of gathered myself and thought, this is in all likelihood, the biggest news story that's happening in my home state in my lifetime. And like, are you sure you're done with journalism? Because now would be a like really a vital moment to be a part of it. And so I started covering the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina for the New York Times, just as a freelancer, and continued grad school. Got a master's in Southern Studies, and as part of that, started working with the Southern Foodways Alliance, and I started documenting the foodways of the South, and by way of that, started working for Whole Foods. And so they hired me in 2007 to tell the story of where their food comes from, to travel the world visiting the farmers and fishers and ranchers and soap makers and lettuce growers, explaining what they do, how they do it, why they do it, what they're doing is different than what mainstream is doing. Um, so yeah, it was a great job to have in my late 20s and 30s. I learned a lot both about food and the world and the craft of photography and filmmaking. So yeah, it was a good chapter, and then I quit that to go back to journalism.
Yeah, and so you mentioned you actually did freelance work for the New York Times on Katrina and was doing that earlier in your career, and you're doing that now too, in addition to getting a amazing spread in the New York Times about your own work
Oh
with the
God, I
book. I
know,
mean, that was amazing. And
so humbling.
yeah, I mean, it was like 2 pages all about Kate and her work in the book, but a very fitting tribute because you've contributed, I'm sure, a lot to the pages in the New York Times over your
Thank you,
career. Yeah, and I mean,
thank
so
you. Yeah,
can you tell us a little bit more about some of the work that you've been doing?
sure. Yeah, so the journalism work that I do now is mostly. I live in North Carolina, and I mostly cover national news that's happening here, and that's mostly for the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, NPR. Um, and I mean, it is a crazy life, but it is like the best job ever. It I feel I feel like um, I feel like I'm in touch with my community. Every day I am documenting and working with real people who live here, and trying to tell a story about how the news, how whatever's happening in the world is affecting their day-to-day lives. Um, right now, that is largely political coverage, which I enjoy for the most part. Um, but yeah, every day is different. Um, and every day is sort of a challenge, a puzzle to figure out. But it's really great.
So, is there any advice that you would give to someone who wants to go into journalism or make photography a career?
Don't do it. I'm just kidding.
Besides that.
I mean, I'm not totally kidding. Only do it if you really, really love it. When I first got started in photojournalism, my interest in photography is specific to journalism. I Yeah, I'll leave it at that. And so yeah, photojournalism. It's when I first started. We in the media business had a lot more resources than we do now. It comes as no surprise to anyone that newspapers specifically are going through a really hard era. And if you drill down farther than that, I would say the visual side of journalism is going through an even harder era. So yeah, I mean it's a great profession, but you work hard every day, and you're I make a good living, but I'm not getting rich off of it. No one is. Um, but I just find it incredibly fulfilling. Yeah. So when I talk to students, I try to be encouraging about going into journalism, but I also try to be realistic that, if it's something that you're serious about doing, you should also be taking classes at the business school, which I did not. But now I run my own business, and so maybe 40% of what I do is photojournalism, and the other 60% is running my own business. And nobody taught me how to do that. That's something that I'm still learning every single day as I look at my calendar and see that my accounting is due. It's
Uh-huh.
I imagine a lot about that as a small business owner.
Yep.
It's hard work. You're not just selling books.
It's literally the same. Like I actually struggle with how to answer this question myself because owning a bookstore looks like such a charmed life, and it is really hard. And I think maybe if I knew how hard it was, maybe I would have stuck with my original career,
Yeah.
but it is so fulfilling, and it is fun. But it's you really need to know what you're getting into. But
Well, before you go farther with that,
yeah.
I would like to say that since publishing my first book a few months ago, um, I have interfaced with a lot of bookstore owners. And the work that you are doing in Columbus, I mean, I have just been like totally wowed by the support that I've felt from you and your bookstore since long before my book was even a reality. And we had never met one another, but you reached out with such encouragement, and you sort of helped lay the groundwork for, it wasn't just, can you come to Columbus? It was, here's a detailed blueprint for how you're going to come to Columbus, how we're going to support you in this endeavor. And there's no other bookstore that did that for me. So I just want to take that moment to celebrate what you're doing because it's unique and amazing.
Oh, thank you. And I mean, we are so excited for you to come. And I'm realizing I didn't say this yet. This is kind of important. Kate's coming to Columbus. Um,
Woohoo!
yeah, I should have led with that. I kind of buried the lead. So, opposite of Journalism 101. But we are so excited that Kate is going to come to Columbus on April 4th to talk about her book. She's going to do a presentation. We're going to have copies of the book. We're going to have United Deli cater it. It's going to be at the Columbus Arts Council. And it's very easy to remember because it is April 4th, 4/4 at 4 p.m. So
Oh,
that just kind
good.
of
You're so good.
that
Yeah.
magically happened. I did not actually think of that until it was on the calendar. And I was like, oh, 444. So everybody should be there. And the extra cool thing about this is that Kate is going to be coming to Columbus just before the grand opening of the exhibit of her work from this book at the Mississippi Museum of Art. Um, yeah, I mean, what an
Yeah,
honor.
I'm excited. It's if anyone wants to come to Columbus and hang out with Emily and me on 4/4 at 4, then you can also come to Jackson. There's a solo exhibit of my work that's happening at the Mississippi Museum of Art, and we're having the grand opening program on April 5th.
Yes.
We hope people will join.
And the exhibit will be up until June 23rd. So you have plenty of time to plan a trip to Jackson to go see it. And Kate's also going to be in Jackson for the Mississippi Book Festival. And the date is September 14th, which is a little bit later than it has been. The organizers of the Mississippi Book Festival have heard everyone's pleas to stop doing it in the middle of summer. So,
At long last, it only
yes.
took 10 years.
So it's the big 10th anniversary celebration, and it's going to be September 14th instead of the middle of August. And I just noticed the other day that they're starting to post the authors who are going to be there, and Kate is one of the first ones that they announced, which, of course, I'm so excited that you're going to be
It's
there
going to be
too.
so fun. Yes, I
Yes.
hope you'll be there.
Oh, we will. We love it. Ever since we opened the bookstore, and since we've been able to do in-person events again, we've been at the book festival in Jackson. So we will definitely see you
I love
there.
it. Yeah, it's such a fun time. But I'm
Yeah.
excited to get back to Columbus. I really haven't been back in a meaningful way in like 25 years. So,
Yeah. I mean, the truth for me is I didn't come back to Columbus for 10 years. It was my 10-year high school reunion was the first time I came back after graduating from high school. And then I started getting involved in governor's school. And then it was a slippery slope from looking at old houses to doing like touring the old houses and looking at, real estate showings. And then I got one. And here I am. So
yes, I love that.
yeah. Well, we can't wait for you
That's
to join
amazing.
us. We're going to have the
Thank
book.
you so much.
Yes. Thank you. Please come again. Is at the store already. So you don't have to wait until April 4th to get the book, but on April 4th you can get it signed. And we're just so excited to see you. And thank you so much for spending time with us today on the podcast, Kate.
Of course, Emily, thank you so much for the invitation. And again, thanks for all that you've done to support not just me, but authors in Mississippi and the South and readers in Columbus and that part of the state.
Thank
I can't
you.
wait to be there with you.
We can't wait. And so for everyone in the meantime, happy reading.